Good morning. We're looking at the Olivet Discourse, which means the message that Jesus gave from the Mount of Olives. But it's in Matthew 24 and 25. So if you have a Bible and you want to follow along, that's where we're going to be. I will be putting all the verses up on the screen. And we started last week introducing this passage. It says in 24:1, Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple, which were enormously white and shiny. It was a wonder of the ancient world, an enormous temple. And Jesus answered them, "Oh, you see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down," which was a shocker that the temple would be destroyed. And as he sat on the Mount of Olives, they left the temple, went down through the Kidron Valley and came up to the Mount of Olives, which was a place they often met privately. The disciples came to him privately saying, "Tell us, when will these things be?" You ready? 3 questions. When will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming, and what's the sign of the end of the age? And we saw that he answered the first one, when will these things be? He said, this generation will not pass before these things take place. And it took place on AD 70. In AD 70, the city of Jerusalem was burnt and torn down. The temple was torn down by the Romans. Regarding the end of the age, he didn't really give them a sign, but do you remember what he said? He talked about how they were going to be persecuted, but this gospel of the kingdom will be preached to all nations, and then the end will come. Right? So there's not really a sign, there's a responsibility of Christians to get the gospel out. And the last one, this is what we're looking at. What will be the sign of your coming? And when he was asked that, here was his answer. Concerning that day and hour, only dispensational, pre-tribulational, premillennialists know. No. Nobody knows. No one knows. There's no sign. Not even the angels of heaven know. Not even the Son knows. Only the Father. And so what we're told to do is stay awake. For you don't know on what day your Lord is coming. So stay awake. Well, what does that mean? Like always be on the alert? And some people think that what that involves is getting deeply involved in prophecy about the second coming so you can figure out when he's coming. But he said, you don't know when I'm coming. That's not why those prophecies were given. That's not what it means to watch. So today, Jesus, in the passage we're going to look at, Jesus actually defines what he wants us to be doing while we wait for his return. He says, you don't know the day or the hour, but know this. So there is something you can know. He says that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would have not let his house be broken into. Therefore, you also must be ready. For the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Now I think that's very strange. On the face of it, it seems to make sense, but the more I thought about it, I wasn't sure that it made too much sense. Okay, so think about this. If the master of the house had known in what part of the night, the watches, so they divided the watches into certain hours during the night. So let's say he's going to come in that watch between 2 and 4 in the morning. Yeah, so if I know he's going to be coming around 3, I'm setting my alarm for 2:45 and I'm going to get my weapon ready, right? If I know the exact hour, I'd be ready. But Jesus said, you don't know the hour. So what do you do? Like, do you stay up every night worrying and waiting about the thief that might break in tonight? I just go to bed every night. Now, when I'm away, my wife barricades the door, right, from anybody breaking in. But most of the time when we're there, we don't think about the thief that's coming. That's because not only do we not know the hour, we don't even know if a thief is going to break in. So why worry? But now think about the coming of Jesus. I do know he's coming. I do know he's coming. I just don't know when. So now he says, stay awake and be ready because you don't know when. You know I'm coming, but you don't know when. Now, if it's the idea that I have to be alert and awake every hour of the day and watching for Jesus, that's practically very hard to carry out. But that's not what he meant. And he's going to tell us what we're supposed to do. Look at this. Who then? If you know that Jesus is coming, but you don't know when, who then is the faithful and wise servant whom his master has set over his household to give them their food at the proper time? Now, in the first illustration, he talked about the master of the house, like the owner of the house. And now he says, but you're not the owner of the house. You're the servants in the house. Now, the word for servant is just slave, but modern translators do not like to translate it slave because our idea of slavery is colored by the pre-Civil War, right? So we picture chattel slavery and people who weren't allowed to be educated. They had been kidnapped and held against their will and all that kind of stuff. In the ancient world, in most of the ancient world, that isn't quite what was involved in slavery. You were a slave usually either because you were captive after a war, which it was that or die, right? Or you were in debt and sold yourself into slavery. And that, in both of these, it was a way to keep people alive and productive. So in most of the ancient world, when a slave was brought in to a house, they could be trained. It's not that you kept them from being educated, you actually educated them. So here's one of the examples in the New Testament is Luke, who was a physician. And you say, wow, so he's a doctor. In our day and age, a doctor is highly educated and makes a lot of money. But in those days, doctors were educated by wealthy homeowners, and you had your own personal doctor in your home, and that's what Luke was. He was a slave who had learned the arts of medicine, and some of the slaves would be educated in reading and writing so they could become tutors to train children, all kinds of skills that they had to become a productive part of the household. And they were people who could be trusted with the care of the home. Think in the Bible, go all the way back to the book of Genesis, and there was a man named Joseph who was sold by his brothers into slavery. And one of the things we read about him when he was sold into Potiphar's house, who was a very high-ranking Egyptian official, we are told that Potiphar trusted him with his entire house, with all that he owned. Right? So when a slave came into your home, he was there to benefit you as the homeowner, but you also developed a relationship as a homeowner with the servant because you needed to be able to trust them. They were in your house when you were not. And they took care of the food and the cleaning and repairs and purchases, so you had to trust them with money. So to be a servant was not to be a chattel slave that you had to watch for and be afraid of running away. They were essentially your employees, and they depended on you. So Jesus says, who then? If you don't know exactly when I'm coming, but you know I'm coming back. Who is the faithful and wise servant? What will a faithful and wise servant do? The faithful and wise servant who his master sets over his household to give them food in their proper time. You're stepping in for the master. So he said, who is the faithful servant? Faithful to who? Well, faithful to the master. Right? Who is faithful and wise? What makes him faithful and makes him wise? Now, that's a very simple question, and Jesus is going to answer it in one sentence. Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly, I say to you, he will set him over all of his possessions. So, who is a faithful and wise servant serving the master in his household when Jesus goes away? He's the one who is doing what he was told to do until the master comes back. That's it. That's it. Well, what were we told to do? This gospel of the kingdom must be preached to all nations, and then the end will come. That's it. Okay, and that's the end of the service. No, not really. See, I like positive messages. I like preaching positive messages where everybody likes it and it feels good and it's positive and we go out pumped. But the tough thing is that sometimes we need to hear the negatives. This is a positive. So we kind of know what to do, but it's very simple. Do what God tells you to do. Do what he made you to do and keep doing it. It doesn't change. The task doesn't change. The mission doesn't change. It's always the same mission. Get the message out. Well, not everybody is happy to continue doing that. Servants can go bad. And that's what Jesus is going to warn about. Now, remember, he's talking privately to his disciples. So these are the men that he has commissioned to serve him. They're the leaders. They're going to be the leaders of the church. So he is warning them. Look, I want you to preach the gospel and do what I've commissioned you to do. Don't go bad. Because leaders can go bad. And that's what he's going to warn about here. But if that wicked servant says to himself, my master is delayed. He went away, but it's taking him a long time to come back. If he thinks in his heart, my master is delayed, and begins to beat his fellow servants. Now remember, this is a warning to servants. Warning to people that profess faith in Jesus. It is a warning in particular to Christian leaders who have been entrusted with leadership to feed the flock, to feed his whole house. He says, if those guys go bad and begin to beat other servants, there's a problem. Now, wait a minute, what's he talking about? Why would servants go bad and begin to beat other servants? Do you remember last time we were together, when you look at Matthew 24, after the disciples asked those questions, Jesus says, be careful that you're not led astray. Don't take as signs what most people take as signs. Don't worry about earthquakes and pestilences and nations rising against nations. Those are not signs, he says. But then he says this. He says, you're going to be delivered up to tribulation, to trouble, and they will put you to death, and you'll be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away. You see that? Jesus warns his disciples. There are going to be people that claim to be followers of Jesus, but they will fall away. And they will betray one another and hate one another. They will fall away. Early on, when I came into evangelicalism, we all saw ourselves as, well, we're on the ship, we're on the ark, and the bad people are out there in the world. But do you know what this is saying? If there are people that fall away and betray one another, the real dangerous people are the ones who are on the inside and who give up the faith. Now, why would people do that? Well, Christianity is not new and novel and exciting. It is the old faith rooted in the ancient promises of God, and it is the same because Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And we as people get bored. We get bored doing the same mission day in and day out, preaching the same mission day in and day out, and every year and every century. And so maybe we could just improve the gospel a little bit. Maybe we could just, maybe we could make Jesus a little more relevant. And maybe we can change what we know about him and change the message and change the goal. When you do that, then it's the old dyed-in-the-wool Christian who's standing for the message of the apostles that is the same from day one. He's the bad guy. He's a bigot. He's a racist. He's a hater. You see how that works? And so people can be religious, but if they abandon the message of the gospel and they abandon Jesus Christ, the true Christians become the bad guys. And good becomes evil and evil becomes good, and all of a sudden there's a persecution of those who believe. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. Oh, where do false prophets come from? See, I think off the top of our heads we look and say, well, the false prophets come from out there. They're outsiders. No, they're inside. They start inside. And they get tired of the gospel, or they think they have something better, something new, something different, a new spirituality, something exciting, something that's novel, and they start putting that out there and drawing people away. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. That when there's no order, and everyone does what is right in his own eyes, then you don't have to care about other people. You only care about you. You don't care about your responsibilities to other people. You care about your rights. And you demand them and insist on them. And it doesn't matter what you do to other people. Welcome to the United States of America. Because this is what people do. That's a warning to us to be very careful about people who change the message and change Jesus Christ. It was happening in the first century. The Apostle John wrote 3 little epistles, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. They were very late John appears to have been the youngest of the apostles, so he appears to have outlived the others into the 70s, 80s, and possibly 90s AD. And as an old man, he wrote these to the churches of Asia, which is Ephesus and the other churches mentioned in the book of Revelation. And here's what he wrote to them: children, it is the last hour, and you've heard that Antichrist is coming. Notice he doesn't say Antichrist is coming, he says you heard it. So his point is that there were people that were talking about an Antichrist coming. The word anti in Antichrist can mean two things. One, against Christ. So there will be a figure who comes who's against Christ, but anti can always also mean instead of in Greek. And my guess is the Antichrist fits both of those models. He is standing against Christ, but he's putting himself in the place of Christ, offering himself instead of Christ. Yeah, Jesus is a nice guy, but I'm better. You can do better. And he's going to offer something else other than the gospel of Jesus Christ. He says, you've heard that Antichrist is coming, so now many Antichrists have come. That's how we know it is the last hour. Now remember, John wrote that in the first century. So there were antichrists then. The spirit of Antichrist against Christ, trying to replace Christ. And who were they? He says, well, they went out from us, but they were not of us. If they had been of us, they would have continued with us, but they went out that it might become plain that they are not all of us. One of the simple truths about the Christian faith, if you want to put yourself to the test on whether or not your faith is genuine, here's one of the tests. Do you persevere? Some people say, oh, well, I feel bad because I sinned. Did God let me go? No, your sin is paid for. The problem is not your sin. There's no longer a sin problem for Christians. Jesus paid for all of that. The question is, are you continuing to believe in Jesus? It is possible for a servant to go bad. It is possible for a servant to start off and then to say, I'm going to let go of the original Jesus. I'm going to let go of the gospel. I think I have something better. That's what was happening here. And the Apostle John says, these are false teachers. This is a lie. They are bad servants. We call that apostasy. Right? We're not talking here just about committing a sin or struggling against sin or things that all of us have. We are talking about totally turning away from the faith and going in a different direction. Now, you might still claim to be a servant of Jesus, but you change the message. And you change the Christ. This happens all the time. It was happening in the first century. And John said, look, they went out from us. Well, why did they go out? Because they couldn't stand you anymore. You know another theme that comes up very often in the epistle of 1 John? The importance of loving your brother. In fact, this is chapter 2, verse 19. A few verses later in 1 John chapter 3, verse 10, John says this, by this it is evident who are the children of God and who are the children of the devil. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor is the one who does not love his brother. It's interesting to me that John, if you ever read the epistle of 1 John, he kind of flows from one theme to another. He has these themes that are all wound together. And sometimes when you're reading, you say, why did he go from here to there? Why Why did he go from false teachers to the importance of loving your brothers? I want to suggest to you that one of the things that happened is that when these people went out from them and left the gospel, they looked at John and the apostles and the real churches, they looked at them as the bad guys. And rather than love them, they spoke against them. They demeaned them and persecuted them and insisted that they were in the wrong. John, the apostle John, who had walked with Jesus, lived with him, heard him, eaten with him, experienced him firsthand. They said, yeah, we know all of that, but we know more. They did that in the first century. There are people 20 centuries later who are still saying they know better than the apostles. No, we believe in the message of the apostles, and you don't go astray from that Jesus or that salvation or that faith. But it's old. It is old. It's true. And that's what we cling to. So when we come back to this, then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you'll be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another, and many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. There are going to be servants that go bad and beat the other servants. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. Now, what does that mean? You mean the one who doesn't die? The one who manages to keep from being arrested or persecuted? No, it means the one who doesn't give up on Jesus. It's the one who holds fast. Yes, I know. It's the old Jesus. Wow, come on. You know, the idea of a human sacrifice to God on the cross, come on. Like that's kind of primitive. Let's update that a little bit. Let's get a little more relevant. No, I'm sticking with that. Yes, it's ancient and primitive because it's a part of the ancient truth of the way the world operates. God hates sin, and his sin can only be appeased by the death of the sinner. And Jesus stood in our place and suffered. And if we believe in that ancient, what C.S. Lewis called in the Chronicles of Narnia, the deep magic, the ancient truth. When you cling to that, you are clinging to the truth. And the world's going to try and pull you away from that. The one who endures to the end and doesn't give up. The one who perseveres and continues in his faith. He's the one who will be saved. So who is this wise and faithful servant whom his master has set over his household to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is the servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all of his possessions. But if that wicked servant says to himself, literally in Greek there it says, he says in his heart. You know, you can say things in your heart that are damaging that nobody else knows. When I struggled, I've often mentioned that I went through a period of about 10 years in my life where I was wrestling with my own faith, and I wasn't even sure if I believed. Nobody here knew it. Because I preached every Sunday. And I was preaching from the Bible, what I knew from the Bible, but my heart was wrestling, and I was saying tough things to myself on the inside. You can start going bad on the inside. The wicked servant says in his heart, my master is delayed. We're going to see this theme come up again, so I don't want to deal with it in too much detail. We oftentimes look and say, well, you know, we don't know when Jesus is coming, and some people can conclude, well, that means it could come any time. We talked about that last time. Set against that idea is the idea that, well, wait a minute, there's a delay. And there has been a delay, right? So for 2,000 years. So you can see why people would look and say, okay, come on, let's think this through. You know, in the first century, this guy they claim this guy died on a cross and was buried and rose again, and then all of a sudden he disappears into heaven. We never see him again. Yeah. Yes, and his followers spread his message around the world, and it has this amazing power for 2,000 years. Yeah, but come on. Okay. So you spread a religion, but the idea that he's up in heaven somewhere floating around and that he's going to come back, really? Let's just update that a little bit and just realize that, that's all a fairy tale. And what he's really talking about is that his spirit, his attitudes and teachings would spread through all of us, and we would make the world a better place through government programs and philanthropy. And let's have a messianic attitude. Now, doesn't that sound like a more realistic religion? That's all built on the idea that we can't, that the master is delayed. That we can't put our trust in that anymore. Now, here we are in 2000, and there are people that say that. You know what? They said it in the first century already. If you look at 2 Peter chapter 3, Peter says, scoffers will come in the last days with scoffing. You know what scoffing is? Disdain, looking down on you. There will be scoffers coming in the last days with scoffing, following their own sinful desires. I want you to notice that, because we're going to talk about that in just a minute. They will say, where's the promise of his coming? For ever since the fathers fell asleep, all things are continuing as they were from the beginning of creation. It's the same every day. Yeah, there's bad things in the world and, all that kind of stuff. So why don't we just put up with it and get used to it? Scoffers. You know why Peter said that? Scoffers will come in the last days? Because he was dealing with scoffers who were saying this very thing. Already in the first century, he says, this is how we know we're in the end times. These people are mocking the return of Christ in the first century, and they're doing it to this day. If that wicked servant says to himself, my master is delayed, and begins to beat his fellow servants and eats and drinks with drunkards, just like Peter said, following their own desires. Look, if there's not a judgment, if there's not a day that is coming where all the wrongs will be made right, and all of the injustices will be corrected, and all the wrongs will be punished, and the right things, the good things will be rewarded by God. If that's not coming, then how should I live? Why should I do what's right? Well, what's right? If that day isn't coming, and if there's no God and there's no heaven and there's no time when his will be done on earth as it is in heaven, if that's not where history is going, then guess who's in charge? I am. Well, I'm in charge for me, and you're in charge for you, and we have 8 billion gods all getting our own ways at the same time. And it doesn't matter what you do to other people to get your own way. Why should you care? You do what you can get away with. And if you have to lie and cheat and steal, just be sure you do it and don't get caught. Right? That's a way to live. But what if there is a day when Christ will come again, when the master who went on his journey comes back, and he entrusted you with a faith, with a belief, with a way to live, that it was your responsibility and my responsibility to live out, to teach, to pass down to our children, to live out as a church, a message to get out to others to join us, to really bring blessing to the world? What if that was our responsibility and we said, I don't want it, that's not sophisticated enough. I'm a sophisticated, modern 21st century person. I'm going to live my own way. If that wicked servant says to himself, my master is delayed, and begins to beat his fellow servants and eats and drinks with drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he does not know. Just because you change your belief doesn't change the fact that Jesus died, was buried, rose again, ascended into heaven, and sits at the right hand of the Father and is coming again to judge the living and the dead. You just stop believing that. That doesn't change who he is. And the reason these people will be caught at a time when they don't expect him, at an hour that they do not know, is because they willingly chose to not believe in those things. And do you know what he's going to do when he comes back? You ready for this? He puts them in eternal time out. I'm just kidding. It's worse than that. He will cut him in pieces. Gentle Jesus, loving Jesus. He's a God of love. God loves the world, right? He would never do. Jesus himself said this, when I return, those who were wise and faithful servants, I will entrust everything to them. And those who were wicked and who gave up and turned away and beat and persecuted my faithful servants, and those who went about living their own lifestyles as though I wasn't coming back, he says, I will come back and I will cut him in pieces and I'll put him with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Wait, is that hell? Oh, see, that's one of those old doctrines. We're sophisticated people. We don't believe in that. God's going to save everybody. Well, if God's going to save everybody, then you tell me who's talking about here. There are some people that don't want to be saved. Do you understand that? They don't want Jesus. They want a God they can recreate in their own image. They want God to be what they want him to be, so he approves what they want to do and how they want to live, which essentially makes them God. That's it. But when he returns, he says, look, I'm going to put you in that place. Now, when Jesus talked, although he mentioned hell, he also talked in terms of the kingdom. And one of the things that he said to people was that there were going to be some people who were going to be cast out of the kingdom into outer darkness where there was weeping and gnashing of teeth, which is what it means is you don't get into the kingdom. He said that to the Pharisees. He said, you're going to look out here and all these tax collectors and prostitutes and sinners, they're going to go into the kingdom of heaven before you, and you are going to be cast into outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. Yeah, this is a warning to people who claim to be servants of Jesus, but turn their backs on the true message and on the true Christ. Now, some of you are going, wait a minute, Pastor Chris, what does this church teach? Don't you teach eternal security? Wait, are you saying you can lose your salvation? I'm saying that if you're asking that question, you're asking the wrong question. Do you know what people are trying to do? Here's what people want to do. They want a gospel that's easy, that doesn't require any commitment to the one who died to save us. Let's find the least amount of commitment so we can get the most people saved. And then we just tell them, let's make it easy. Look, you don't have to do anything. Just believe in Jesus, and it doesn't matter what happens from then on. It doesn't matter. No, it does matter. It does matter. And it's not because of your work saving you. The question is, do you understand who you just committed your life to? Who is Jesus? He's not just another preacher or rabbi or philosopher. He's not a passing fad. He is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He is God become flesh and now ascended into heaven, seated at the right hand of the Father. He will rule, and he rules. And when you become a Christian, you're saying, I cast off my past and I bow my knee and I accept the grace and forgiveness. What do you want of me? And he says, here's what I want of you. I want your whole life. I want your whole life. I want you to love me with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And you become a part of my body, and I will work in you and through you, and I want to get the message of how people can get right with God. I want to use you and get it out through you. And you know what's required of me? All that's required of me is that I be found faithful. Don't turn your back. You know that song we just sang? He picked me up and turn me around. I think there's a lot of people who don't agree with the turning around part. Some people think, oh, he picked me up, but he lets me do whatever I want. No, that's not what Christianity is. That's what the wicked servants do. And there's not much good spoken of them by Jesus. I want you to look with me at, real quickly, sometimes once you get a certain idea in your head, other passages, you can read them, and all of a sudden they make sense in that light. Like, you don't have to have comment on it. Look at what the Apostle Paul, now Jesus said what we just looked at. The Apostle Paul picks up that perspective. Listen to what he says in Ephesians chapter 5. But sexual immorality and all impurity or covetousness must not even be named among you as is fitting or proper among the saints. Let there be no filthiness or foolish talk or crude joking, which are out of place. But instead, let there be thanksgiving. For you may be sure of this, know this, that everyone who is sexually immoral or impure or who is covetous, that is an idolater, has no inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. Let no one deceive you, because there will be people that want to deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Oh, well, okay, so how many times do I have to be sexually immoral to be sexually immoral? What if I do it just once? Why are you asking those questions? Right? Isn't that weird? I don't want that. I want to be a faithful, wise servant. I left that behind. I want to move in the other direction. I don't want to find excuses for why I can keep going the wrong way. That's not who Jesus is. No, wrath, God's wrath comes on those people, both in this life and at the judgment when Jesus comes again. We're going to have to give an account. Therefore, don't become partners with them. For at one time you were darkness, but now you're light in the Lord. Walk as children of light, for the fruit of the light is found in all that's good and right and true. And try to discern what's pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness. Instead, expose them. Point them out for what they are. A few verses later, he says, look carefully how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise. Who is the wise servant? It's the one who walks the way God wants him to walk, making the best use of the time because the days are evil. Don't be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Well, what's the will of the Lord? Don't get drunk with wine. That's debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit. addressing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody to the Lord with your heart, giving thanks always and for everything to God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. Try and do those. Some people say, oh, that's too hard. So we'll come up with a different Jesus and a different religion that finds some way, that, I can sit in the corner of my living room listening to certain music on headphones with my legs crossed in a particular position, saying Om to the universe, and that will make me right with God. No, if you're right with God, you have joy in your heart to sing. If you're right with God, you are able to give thanks always and for everything. Always and for everything. And you are submissive to other people, which he's going to go on to say, wives, submit to your husband. Yes, I love that verse. And the next one is about another form of submission. Husbands, love your wives. Children, obey your parents. Parents, don't provoke your children, right? See, this all unfolds naturally into a way of life that is light. In 1 Thessalonians, Paul said this, and he's talking about the day that Jesus comes. He says, for you yourselves are fully aware the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. Now watch this. I know we make a big to-do. We've made a big to-do about pronouns, and we don't like the idea of pronouns, but sometimes pronouns are very important. Watch this. While people are saying there's peace and security, as in the days of Noah, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. They were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage. Remember, just an ordinary day. These people, he says, while they are saying peace and security, then sudden destruction will come upon them as labor pains come upon a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. They, them, they're not watching. But you. You're not in darkness, brothers, for that day to surprise you like a thief. You shouldn't be surprised. Now, you might be shocked because of the timing. Like, wow, it's today. But you know it's coming. For you're all children of light and children of the day. We're not of the night or the darkness, so let us not sleep as others do, but let's keep awake and be sober. You must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Who then is the faithful and wise servant, whom his master has set over his household to give them food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find doing when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. He's going to elaborate on that, and we'll look at that in coming weeks. We're called to a simple task. The gospel of the kingdom must go out to all nations, and we are the people that have been called and commissioned to do that. Be faithful and wise. Don't go bad. Don't turn away from Jesus or from the faith, because there is not any hope promised to them. Let's close in a word of prayer. Thank you, Father, for words of warning. And I just pray that you'd rivet these to our hearts and draw us to yourself to believe the simple gospel of salvation and to allow you to turn our lives around. Lord, lead us and keep us and grant us the strength to persevere the mockery, the demeaning, the persecution, the hardship, that we might in the end be rescued. And we pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.